I'm Jenny Forstall. Thank you all for being here. Along with Dr. Claire Abernathy, I'm one of the faculty co-chairs of the Stockton American Democracy Project and Political Engagement Project. We're really happy that you are all here today. This is the latest event in our series that's examining alternatives to opioids. So today we have a really great set of panelists who are speaking to medical marijuana as one potential alternative to opioids. So just a quick logistical notes. If you need a record of attendance today for class, or if you're here for extra credit, we have a sign-in sheet that's floating around here somewhere. It's over there. And if you don't get to it during the event, don't stress out. You can see me or Dr. Abernathy, and we will sort of get you signed in. Another note is that we're filming, and so if you would not move around, and especially to keep the middle aisle clear so that we can not have heads in the way of our video, that would be great. Thank you. So opioid use continues to represent a growing public health crisis. So the misuse and addiction of opioids, including in particular prescription painkillers or pain relievers, has been increasing over the past 2 decades, with a particularly sharp increase evident in the last several years. Recent projections suggest that opioid-related deaths could reach 3,000 in the state of New Jersey this year alone. So in today's event, we're turning our attention to one particular alternative to using opioids in the treatment of chronic pain and other conditions. So we're going to be focusing on medical marijuana. Our panelists today will discuss the effectiveness of medical marijuana as an alternative approach to pain management. They'll also consider current and proposed policies to regulate marijuana for medical use, and particularly sort of place the conversation in our local context, sort of how medical marijuana works in the state of New Jersey. So it's my pleasure to get us started by introducing our panelists. First, we have Dr. Patricia Kasica. She graduated from the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey. She's been an anesthesiologist, and pain management specialist for the past 30 years. She's been one of the first doctors to sign up with the medical marijuana program because of a tragedy in her own family. Since that time, she's known as she saw pain patients that this could help their pain, but it wasn't a new policy until the new policy allowed pain patients to participate in this program that she saw what seemed to be nothing short of a miracle. Right? Patients are coming off their opioids and still having pain relief. So Dr. Kasica has been working with patients of all ages and with all kinds of chronic illnesses, from seizures to PTSD. Since retiring from anesthesia and pain management last year, she's been focused on medical marijuana and detoxing patients from opioids. Next, we have Bridget Hill-Zayat. She's an attorney at the Hoban Law Group, licensed in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland. Her practice focuses on the energy and cannabis industries. Specifically, she takes cannabis companies from cradle to grave, starting with the incorporation and license applications through to the sale of marijuana. She advises successful applicants on how to improve their energy efficiency, apply for state efficiency programs, liaise with regulators, and handle the ongoing compliance issues relevant to the cannabis business. In particular, she is active in the legal cannabis industry. She was selected to participate in the Pennsylvania State Senator Dalen Leach's Cannabis Conference, convened to help develop standards and methods for cannabis regulation in Pennsylvania. She regularly testifies for states like New Jersey and Pennsylvania, exploring the creation and development of legal cannabis markets. So Bridget's work is acutely cannabis-focused. She's geared towards helping growers, processors, and dispensaries thrive. And she continues to engage in the legal community on issues, teaching classes on cannabis topics for lawline.com, Greenflower Media, and Stockton University, where she serves as an assistant professor. She also speaks at industry events for the National Cannabis Bar Association, Cannavation, and Women Grow. And she writes articles for Elevated Nation, Cannabiz MD, and Collogia. Last but not least, we have Thomas Ola, who graduated with a BS in Criminal Justice in 1976 from the College of New Jersey. He later graduated with a master's in Administrative Science from Fairleigh Dickinson University in 2003. He began his professional career in hospitality industry as a senior gaming regulator in the Casino Control Commission in Atlantic City in April of 1978 and retired after 28 years of service. He later became senior management analyst at Bearing Point, a multinational management and technology consulting firm in McLean, Virginia. He came back to the area in 2008, where he served as project manager for Bally Technologies in Egg Harbor Township. And he has also worked as a Spectrum Gaming Group in Lidwood as a project consultant, training inspectors and setting up regulatory compliance standards and gaming rules for several national casino organizations throughout the United States. Tom began his cannabis career in Compassionate Care Foundation of New Jersey as a project manager in 2013, where he established internal control standards and standard operating procedures for their medical marijuana facility. Shortly thereafter, Tom was promoted to dispensary manager, and he later oversaw the operation of the second medical marijuana facility to open in New Jersey. Presently, Tom is an adjunct instructor at Stockton University. He created the class Medical Marijuana in New Jersey that some of you might be interested in taking in the fall of 2015. He's also the CEO of TAO Consulting LLC and advises the cannabis industry in that capacity. So we'll hear first from Patricia, then followed by Bridget, and then from Thomas. And then following the remarks from each panelist, I'll moderate a brief Q&A discussion, and then we will open it up for the audience to ask whatever questions you might have. So we look forward to hearing your questions, so keep them in mind as you listen to our panelists. For now, I'll turn things over to Dr. Kasica, who will start off the remarks for the panel.
Okay. So, as a lot of my patients have heard, the reason why I got involved in the medical marijuana program is because 14 years ago, my younger sister at age 38 was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. So having cancer in her bones was extremely painful, and every time she would go to the doctor, they would give her another fentanyl patch and another fentanyl patch. She had probably 5 of them across her back, and it sedated her. It made her sick. She had to illegally buy the marijuana on the street. And what I found was that not only was she able to take those patches off, she didn't go through not one day of withdrawal, which was amazing to me. As you can imagine, being trained in conventional medicine for 30 years, I was astounded. I started to do some research to find out how this could be. And what I found was that the cannabis binds to the same receptors in the brain that the opioids do. And that is why she got the pain relief as well as none of the withdrawal symptoms. There are 2 main components of cannabis. There's the THC, which is typically associated with the euphoric feeling, the sedation, and then there's the CBD, which is the natural anti-inflammatory and pain-relieving component. There are also terpenes that are within the plant, which also account for a lot of the medicinal qualities. The 2 types of plants that are available are sativas, which are used mostly during the day, and indicas, which are used at night. They have also made hybrid plants that have some of each component, as well as very high CBD plants that are excellent for pain relief, that have so little THC that patients that use that particular plant can actually go to work and not have any of the euphoria involved. No sedation, they get all of the relief with none of the high. The conditions that I've personally seen that have benefited by cannabis are multiple sclerosis, seizure disorder, Parkinson's, tremors, HIV, cancer, glaucoma, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, arthritis, Tourette's syndrome, PTSD, cachexia, depression, and autism. Some cases that I've seen, I have a 75-year-old white male that has severe arthritis. He was taking 15 Percocet a day. He started in the cannabis program, stopped all of it, cold turkey, went through no withdrawal. I have a 60-year-old patient who was taking 10 methadone tablets a day. He was in a severe motorcycle accident when he was younger, and he is down to 2 pills a day and is getting decent pain relief. And just as an aside, I have an 18-year-old patient who had very violent outbursts with Tourette's syndrome, who told me he was bullied for 4 years in high school and decided that he was not going to go on to college because he didn't want to be bullied for another 4 years. So we decided to place him on a higher THC strain, And his outbursts calmed down so much so that he is now enrolled in school. It just is amazing to see some of the cases that I've seen. I'm even considering writing a book with some case studies because I think the medical community is very close-minded, some doctors anyway, as to the benefits of the cannabis. On consulting with a physician that signs up with the program, the patient can discuss their needs and recommendations can be made as far as which strains would be most helpful for them. And depending on the levels of THC and CBD, you can see the effect in them. Even 3 months later when I follow up with them, it sometimes is amazing to see. A lot of times I hear from patients who never smoked a day in their life, well, how would we take this in? Well, at some of the dispensaries, they have lozenges, they have ready-made oil. You can make it into butter, cook with it. There's many ways that you can take the cannabis in to get the good effects. Currently, I am a provider for the cannabis program, but also I'm collaborating with a PhD in biochemistry who uses natural substances with neuroamino acids to decrease the craving for opioids, as well as using the medicinal marijuana to get them the pain relief that they need so that they don't turn back to the opioids. In my opinion, from the cases that I've seen, this is really the answer to the opioid crisis in America. So thank you for listening.
So I'm Bridget Hill Zayat. For the last 11 years, I've been an administrative and energy attorney, so working with regulated commodities. I was happily plowing that route when we had a client who was an energy supplier call us up and say, we have a customer who's using megawatts of energy, and that is a lot of energy. Your house doesn't use megawatts of energy, you probably use kilowatts of energy. So he asked me to go down, do a site inspection, did a site inspection, and it was a legal grow. So huge plants everywhere, and I'm a nice Catholic schoolgirl. I was like, those are drugs. But you know, he was licensed, he was doing everything right except for this. He was trying to keep himself under the radar, and in doing so, really made a red flag. Like, here I am, and that's not what you want to do. He was also paying tens of thousands of dollars a month for energy, which is not something you want. So I helped him bring down the cost of his grow, got him cheaper energy, and then also helped him with some compliance, and that just sort of started my career in cannabis. I did not have this overwhelming love of the plant that I hear a lot of people talk about. This was, you know, another commodity that was actively seeking professional representation and could not get it. People, I think attorneys and physicians are very risk adverse and don't want to do this. And in a sense, when I started, I was sort of committing career suicide. Like, I knew that if I got into this, I'd be breaking federal law every day, and I do. I break federal law every day as an attorney doing this. But getting to see some of the patients do so much better, and getting to see some of these businesses employ people in the state of New Jersey and do better is really rewarding. And I don't regret it for a second, even if my dad thinks I'm a drug lawyer, which he does. But it has been incredibly eye-opening, and I'm so grateful because I get to see an industry start from its inception and turn into this very professional, wonderful market. It's been nothing but a joy. So I'm happy to be here. I don't know if there's more.
My name's Tom Ola. I'm an adjunct instructor at Stockton. I've actually created the class Medical Marijuana in New Jersey, which is now in its 4th consecutive sellout. How did they get involved in the cannabis industry? Well, as a criminal justice major, and anybody here in a criminal justice major, you know, drugs are always a part of the talk about it. At that time at college, there was Nixon was president, and there was an anti-drug campaign, and just saying no, and the Rockefeller drug laws and all this other stuff associated with, you know, illegal drugs and so forth and so on, which I kind of, you know, took an interest to as a criminal justice major. Lo and behold, I ended up in the casino business, and I stayed there for approximately 30 years, traveled all over the place. made some good contacts, developed a lot of insight, a lot of good information. But I really wanted to do something different. After my tenure with the casinos, I said, oh, let's do something different. Well, I'm actually an old school gardener, so to speak, and my brother and I have what they call the Hungarian peasant gene, which allows us to work freely with dirt. We love to garden. So I started doing a little gardening, amateur gardening. You know, my grandmother was a old Hungarian lady that lived to be 95 years old that used to grow her own vegetables. So I kind of learned a little bit about organics and the things that she would put in the soil and how she would get these tremendous, you know, yields of plants. But what really turned me to cannabis was my mother-in-law, Jane Lombardi, who was an original graduate of Stockton University, the first graduating class, passed away of pancreatic cancer back in, I think it was probably about 2010. And I had a good relationship with my mother at the time. I used to actually take her up for her chemotherapy up to Fox Chase Cancer up in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia, which is about a good 2-hour ride from where she lived at down in Memora. So along the way, we used to talk a lot. She was very, very well read about history and so forth. And she used to talk about all the medications she used to take and how she used to feel. And as her caregiver, I was allowed to go and talk to the doctors with her. And she was prescribed these huge amounts of pharmaceuticals. I mean, every time I went there, it was 8 or 10 different prescriptions. And she would just tell me on the way back, Tom, this doesn't work for me, this doesn't work for me. She was taking Marinol at the time. That was a synthetic THC that was available. But her biggest thing was she just couldn't eat. And she said, you know, if I could just eat, she said, I think I would feel a lot better. And she just couldn't eat. And unfortunately, she passed away. The program was not available in New Jersey at the time. So then I kept following this. I saw that, you know, Corzine signed this medical marijuana bill called the Compassionate Care Act at his last day of office. And I kept looking at that and, you know, seeing what was going to develop with that. And it took years and years and years. And I finally saw that there was a facility open up in Egg Harbor Township. And I think, geez, that's my backyard. And, you know, maybe they need somebody to work over there as a, you know, as a grower or just a, you know, a help out guy or something like that. I never, you know, envisioned getting the role that I did. And then I applied, and I actually met Bill Thomas, who's here now as our former CEO of Compassionate Care. And Bill hired me as a project manager and asked me to write internal controls for the facility, which I did. So we had internal controls because we were very well regulated by the state. We had to have things exactly the way it was. Everything had to be measured in grams and so forth. And from that, I became dispensary manager. So I actually got to hire a lot of the growers and a lot of the people that worked at Compassionate Care at the time. So I got a real good feel for you know, what it took to grow a plant indoors, which was not easy. So Compassionate Care opens up, and the first day we're there. And at that time, there was only one facility open, and that opened in February of 2013, and that was up in Montclair. And they quickly ran out of product, and they weren't growing anymore, and people were complaining they needed to get their medicine. They had cards that were only good for 2 years. So the state kind of put a rush on to have those patients come in first. Okay, so we reached out to those patients and we said, you know, if you're interested, Compassionate Care is open for you. You know, you come down, we would serve you. So we opened up in October of 2013. But at that time, there was only about 1,200 patients registered in the entire program in New Jersey. And that was simply because there was no doctors prescribing it. Doctors weren't interested in the program because their names had to be published in a register. And doctors just didn't want to be associated with marijuana or be considered to be a marijuana-seeking doctor. So consequently, we had our first group of patients we opened up. And when you saw these people walk in, you kind of heart went out for them because these people were really in pain. These people were really in pain. They were fentanyl patches, morphine, Oxycontin. One or two of them were actually toying to being heroin addicts at the time. So we came in and we sat down with them and we discussed what their medical history was and what strains, you know, would help them and what they were looking for to do it. But we also knew that a majority of the patients that initially were there were using cannabis quite regularly. Even though it wasn't available legally, they had a black market that they were utilizing it. So the biggest concern that they wanted a place that was a safe place where they can go, where they weren't going to be arrested, they weren't going to be robbed, and they knew they were going to get a good quality plant that wasn't tapered with in any way. So it gave them a great feeling that they know that this is a place that if they needed their medicine, cannabis, they can really get it. The price was high. The program gradually got more and more doctors associated with it, and I think now we're up to 35,000 patients, over 600 and some doctors prescribing now. We're on the brink of legalization for recreational use. Governor Murphy has just signed approved 6 more dispensaries to open up. And they should have had licenses that should have been issued by now, but they finally found out that they should probably investigate these people first before they order them a license, because you don't want to have to go back and take it away from them. So it's kind of moving in the right direction now. But if there's one thing I could say about cannabis is people want to know where it comes from. You know, what went into the grow. This wasn't something that some guy grew in their backyard and to make it stronger, put something on it. And they just want to know they can legally buy it without being arrested or robbed. Someone's not going to meet them behind a Wawa and do a drug deal, and they're going to be ripped off, and so forth and so on. So I think medical cannabis has really helped a lot of people. Again, people with OxyContin have loved the idea that they can take cannabis and not rely on those pills. Those pills, they just constipate them. They give them aggression. They just don't feel well. They just want the opportunity to get some alternative medicine, something that is not synthesized, something that's natural for them. So we've had good results with that so far. I mean, I think medical marijuana has helped a lot of people in New Jersey. Unfortunately, with the regulations now, we don't offer a lot of products. We got a new governor who's a little bit more receptive, a lot more receptive than the old governor was. He really wanted to be president, so that was the reason why it wasn't going anywhere. So now I think with the new moving forward, you're going to see a lot more products available. Edibles are one thing people really want. Different strains. There's 562 strains. We can't grow every strain. So you got to understand, when you grow indoors, it's a lot different than growing outdoors, because you have limited space. We call limited real estate. And it's much, much more expensive to grow indoors. So people say, why is marijuana so high in this state for? Because it's grown indoors and because your electrical bill is high. I mean, our electrical bill at Compassionate Care was anywhere between $7,000 and probably $10,000 a month. Tacked it on to rent and all the other things that go along with running a facility, you can see why. So I think medical marijuana is going to help a lot of people. I think it's here to stay, and it can only improve people's lives and get people off these synthetic drugs that are out there now. So.
Well, thank you so much. So your opening remarks have raised a lot of issues, both sort of benefits of medical marijuana, but also maybe some regulatory and implementation issues that we'll definitely get into. And so I think maybe a good place to start this discussion would be for you to say a little bit more about the current structure of the sort of policies in New Jersey. And so maybe we can start with Bridget giving us a sort of overview of what is the current law, how does New Jersey compare to some of the other states, and we'll sort of see where the discussion then goes from there.
Sure, so Jersey's been limping along basically since the original legislation came out. So we have this compassionate care statute. We have 6 vertically integrated licenses. So that means that licensees are not just growing, but they're growing, processing, and selling, which now in a more mature market, say Colorado or California, that doesn't really happen that often anymore. Usually you get a license to grow or a license to manufacture, process, and dispense, and they're separate. And now in California, you'll see even a greater variety of licenses. So a license to transport, distribute, similar to alcohol, even micro licensing. So you'll have small shops, cottage industry type stuff, indoor, outdoor, that sort of thing. Jersey is antiquated. These 6 licensees, nobody else, I mean, you don't see that anymore. And now we're gonna have 6 more vertically integrated licenses, which was actually quite astounding to me when that happened. I didn't think that Jersey would continue in that line, but they are. I know that there's gonna be additional licenses that will be disaggregated, so it will be similar to other states. It is very restrictive. There's really no advertising at all. And I know in the future legislation, there's probably not going to be any advertising. You can't even donate to a charity to try and get your name out if you're a dispensary. It is very, very restrictive, and I can't quite understand why, frankly. Alcohol kills people every day, and you don't see nearly the restrictions on that commodity that you see on cannabis. I work with energy, suppliers, generators. The bad installation and poor infrastructure for energy, again, will kill people, and I don't see the regulations on that. So it is a very restricted commodity with a very limited patient customer base. It is amazing to me that people survive in this business right now.
do you want to add anything?
I think one of the things you have to remember in New Jersey, in order to get a medical marijuana card, you have to have one of the debilitating diseases that the state recognizes. And right now we've expanded it in the last year, and PTS, anxiety, and so forth and so on are available. So if you have any one of those diseases, you have to find a doctor that's actually registered in the program, because he's the only one that could actually give you a permission slip to get in. So then you have to make
you can get kicked out of the practice.
Yes,
if you ask.
yes. The doctor has to be registered with the state before he can even do that. So you have to visit that doctor, and you have to pay a fee, an appointment fee, okay, which is not covered by insurance. Some doctors charge as high as $300 for initial visit, and you have to establish a relationship with that doctor. So it depends on what ailment you are and how well he knows you. You might have to come back a few more times before he really recognizes you as a true patient, at which time you have to pay an additional appointment fee. Okay, so then if the doctor says, okay, I agree, he's going to sign off, and he's going to give you a PIN number, and you go back, and now you have to, it's your responsibility to now go back online, okay, and fill out all the documentation. And it's quite detailed to what you have to put down, and you have to provide a driver's license and everything like that. A lot of people aren't really computer literate like you guys are. There's a lot of people that really don't have the ambidextrous ability to maneuver a computer, let alone, do something as important as get a card.
And they're sick.
And they're sick,
right,
and they're sick, and they have to take a picture against a white wallboard. And so what we did at Compassionate Care is we basically said, listen, we'll do that for you. You come in. We actually hired a girl just to do that, and she was great. She had the patience of a saint. And these people would come down, and they would sit down, and she would fill out all the documentation, take the picture with her iPhone, and send it off to Tread. Okay. Then you had to pay, at that time, was $200 for the card. Okay. $200 for the card. So you figure now you're probably into about maybe $500 or $600 before you're allowed to purchase cannabis. Now, depending on what your ailment was and how well you knew the doctor, he can prescribe only up to 2 ounces. That was the maximum he could apply. Okay, some doctors went to 2 ounces. Some doctors only prescribed a quarter of an ounce. Then you had to come back every 30 days to get your prescription renewed, or every 90 days to get that certification done again, which was another fee.
Right.
So people basically saying, hey, wait a minute. This is a lot of money. And then the product itself was well over $500 an ounce, again, because of the indoor grow and everything else associated with it. So it's an expensive program. It's expensive for people. And people said, hey, listen, I'll just go back to the black market. I'll take the chance with the guy I was dealing with, because I know I'm going to get it cheaper, and I'm not going to have to jump through all these hoops.
And when you go, I watched LeafLink is a platform for cannabis business, and the owner was on Fox News the other night, and the Fox News commentator was like, let's give up this pretense that this is for patients, that this is for sick people. And I was like laughing out of my chair. If you go to these dispensaries, you could see the walkers lined up. I mean, these are like people, they have shuttles in Maryland from some of the assisted living facilities. I mean, this is not a swinging like club with a bunch of 20-year-olds. I mean, these are sick folks. And so this idea that there's, this pretense that people are just doing it, to get high is actually pretty laughable. It's so expensive. I don't know anybody who would pay that much money for what is basically light beer,
We had a gentleman that was actually used to come in on a gurney, and ambulance used to come and drop him off. He could only move his head, and his caregiver was with him, and he would purchase his 2 ounces every month, and he was in such pain and agony that, and I talked to the guy, he was coherent and everything, and he said, it just gave me a quality of life. He said, it made me feel good, gave me a quality of life. But my heart went out for him. We had a gentleman would come, and he was a paraplegic, but he had one of those motorized wheelchair. He would drive a van, and the ramp would come down, and like a starship, and he'd come in, and he was functioning by himself. And he said, it just gives me a quality of life. It makes me feel better. And he said, I just don't want to take those damn pain medications anymore. I really want to get off that. I want to start feeling better. I want to start feeling better about myself. And it's the same thing. We have people with pain, glaucoma, you name it. Any of those diseases that were covered, it really, really helped those people. It gave them a sense of hope, really.
Exactly. In one of our medical journals about a year and a half ago, it's the Journal of the American Medical Association, they did a study where they had a petri dish with leukemia cells that they put the CBD oil on the petri dish, and what they found was that it inhibited the growth of leukemia cells. So it makes you wonder, why isn't this everywhere in the news, all over? And I think Big Pharma is putting a lot of pressure to continue the stigma against cannabis so that they can continue to sell their chemo medications and things like that. And I'm not saying that cannabis will cure cancer, but certainly I think that it is a help with some other things that they're starting to now see.
And I think to a certain extent they're coming from the dark side, right? I mean, this is a market. I can tell you that my law firm is dealing with tobacco companies, alcohol distributors, and I would not be surprised if we have some pharma clients as well. I mean, it's more than 30 states at this point. It's happening.
And marijuana's got two things going against it. My mic's still on? The first thing is the name marijuana. I mean, it's a Mexican nickname for a cheap Mexican cigarette, okay? That name was invented by a guy named Henry Ansinger. If you remember Henry Ansinger, if you guys in the history of Prohibition ages and so forth, he was really your first drug czar. The second thing is the smoke. And people say, well, how can you smoke a medicine? I mean, New Jersey just passed all these regulations about you can't smoke here, you can't smoke where it's bad for you. It's gonna, nicotine and so forth and so on. So how could smoking marijuana be beneficial for you? So I had a conversation with an executive, Bristol Myers Squibb, a pretty big guy up there, and I says, what is it with what are you guys really against? He says, listen, he says, it cost us between $1.5 and $2 billion to develop a new drug that we can only use for 7 years before it goes generic. And we have to go through all kind of clinical studies, all kind of FDA approvals, all kind of hurdles with the Food and Drug Administration, everybody else, to get this drug to market. The last thing we want to hear is, I got a plant growing in my backyard that can do the same thing. It's the pharmaceutical industry and the lobbyists. And the pharmaceutical industry is the largest employer in the state of New Jersey. It employs more people than any other industry. Maybe not necessarily down here, but in parts of Central and North Jersey. And they pay large salaries and they have huge political connections.
They're huge donors, especially in New Jersey.
So you can see why there's this kind of pushback against legalizing marijuana when you just invested all this money in these drug companies out there. And you look at Israel. Israel is the #1 country for cannabis studies in the world. They are so far ahead of everybody else in the way they look at cannabis and how cannabis can help them. And the reports that are coming out of Israel that can help people with Alzheimer's disease, it can create all different types of benefits that we don't even want to address in this country, but again, politically. And unfortunately, our last governor wanted to be president.
So you're raising some concerns about access, right? That there's just not really enough dispensaries to go around for the number. Like Tom mentioned, there's about 35,000 registered patients currently in the state of New Jersey. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the kinds of policy changes that you think would help these sort of issues of access. So what are the problems so money seems to be a problem that patients are running into, but there might also be concerns about, right, are there enough dispensaries? So sort of how are they distributed in the state? And again, sort of what kind of policy changes do you think might help to fix that?
Well, under present regulations, we have 6 dispensaries operating now, 2 in North Jersey, 2 in Central Jersey, 2 in South Jersey. Okay, now that's what the initial Compassionate Care Act allowed for. Now the Governor Murphy has allowed for 6 additional dispensaries, 2 North, 2 Central, 2 South.
But that in itself is laughable, right? I mean, this is the most densely populated state in the country.
Right.
The idea that we would only have 12 dispensaries is absurd. Yes, I understand that because it's a medical market, patients have to register. That does strangle, your patient/customer population. So I take issue with that. It shouldn't be so hard to become a patient. It shouldn't be so hard to qualify as a patient. And then there also should be a greater number of licensees. So there needs to be enough people to support the market, and there needs to be enough product to support the patient population.
And that is so true because initially, New Jersey, back in 2000 when the act came out, said there was actually 40,000 people that could directly benefit from cannabis.
More, yeah.
40,000, and this was back in probably 2011
yeah.
when the act was written, and then consequently, politically, they whittled it down to just 6 dispensaries. In the future, I think there's a stranglehold right now. There's not enough cannabis produced. There's 35,000 patients now that have access only to 6 dispensaries. So obviously, supply and demand plays effect. And what happens with supply and demand economics 101? The price will always be high. It's just a simple rule of law, a simple rule of thought. So.
And making sure that the appropriate product is available for the patients for what they need, I think is also an issue. And given the regulations or the statute that we have right now, That's certainly not happening.
And I think they need to schedule it different also. The scheduling of cannabis is done in such a way as if it were an illegal drug. And so the research doesn't move forward on it because of the way it's scheduled. If they were to change that, maybe more research could be done.
It's scheduled Schedule 1.
Yeah.
It's like heroin.
Yes, like heroin.
That's why drug companies won't touch it, because it's federally illegal. Even institutions, initially Rutgers was going to be the go-to institution until they found that it was federally illegal under Schedule 1. They were in jeopardy of losing their federal funding, so they shied away from it. Just a little bit about how this program got started. The medical marijuana class here at Stockton got started because one of your provosts, Kara Hood, actually visited Compassionate Care, and I took her on a tour. And she was just amazed at what happened, and just through, on back of a napkin, she says, we think we could put a class together. And I says, yeah, I think it would be great. Let me work on it. And your President Kesselman, was very, very receptive to it. He saw this 4 years ago when we met him. He was right on board with this. He says, yes, this is something we should get involved with. This is something that's definitely going to be the future. This is something our students would definitely benefit from. So President Kesselman was very, very supportive of this program from the beginning.
So this is, I think, helpful. So you mentioned that marijuana is sort of scheduled, currently a Schedule 1 drug, but most of the students here, I think, are not currently cannabis minors. So it might help if you could say a little bit about sort of what it means to be a Schedule 1 drug, what criteria are used to classify Schedule 1 drugs, and what sort of characteristics define the sort of scheduling process. Or
no medical benefit. Essentially is the idea, that there's no medical benefit, that it's highly addictive, and the end, right? It's sort of like the end-all stopped discussion. And really the great injustice of that is that it makes it so that we can't study it. It creates this logical fallacy, right? There's no benefit to it, so you're not allowed to research it, but we can't prove that there's a benefit to it because you're not allowed to research it. Meanwhile, the federal government has the patent on the plant, So, the idea that they're saying there's no medical benefit, you're not allowed to research it, but we're still going to hold the right to any sort of production from it later on is very telling and absurd, frankly. There's talks about descheduling, which would be great. Then you're in the nutraceutical world, right? So when you go to GNC and you buy echinacea, right? They're not allowed to say on the bottle, this is going to help you with XYZ issue. I think a lot of people in the cannabis industry are hoping that it becomes, nutraceutical world. The big fear is that then it becomes Schedule 2. Schedule 2 is, okay, this is a real powerful drug. We can research it, it might have a medical benefit, but then it becomes something that's expensive to produce, expensive to purchase. It really takes it out of that sort of cottage industry that has grown up in the United States. I think that the federal prohibition will likely end, but I think it's going to come from state passage. So if you look at women's right to vote, women had the right to vote in the states before they had the right to vote federally. And I think the same thing is going to happen here. We have more than 30 states now that have given people the right to take cannabis as a medication, at the very least, not even a recreational market. What I think is going to happen here is the same thing. There's too much money on the table. There's too much benefit to patients and even people who are using it recreationally, which I don't think exists. I think everyone's a patient in some form. But even there, people are drinking less. They're safer. It is going to happen. It's just how fast it happens.
Actually, you could thank Richard Nixon for Schedule 1. And on October 27th, 1970, he signed the Comprehensive Drug Abuse and Prevention Control Act. And basically, marijuana is considered along the same lines as heroin, LSD, peyote, and ecstasy, which will have, according to the Act, have absolutely no medical value at all.
Right.
So Richard Nixon
and
Richard,
it was in,
yes.
Even after he had a panel of people telling him that was not the case. But he had a political motivation, he was going to do it.
The real reason was Richard Nixon wanted to be able to access your house if you were someone that was subversive and not along his lines. He wanted to give the police the power to no knock, and because you had the ability to destroy whatever evidence was there. So he included that to kind of keep the subversive groups online, namely the Black Panthers, the Weathermen Underground, and some of those other 70s groups that you guys probably haven't even heard about, but in my time were very popular.
It allowed him to specifically target and take away the civil rights of ethnic minorities who were his political adversaries, as well as left-leaning political activists. And it was actually quite brilliant of him, because not only can he now walk into your house and search it, he can search your car, he could do all of those things. It was a very strategic way of taking away people's civil rights.
But you mentioned a little bit about the sort of research, like what would be what sort of gains you might get from descheduling or sort of bringing it down to a Schedule 2. So I wonder, maybe Pat, you can say a little bit about this because you raised the sort of research aspect of it. Like what kinds of, so right now, just to sort of clarify, there are limitations on research for Schedule I drugs. So if you are interested in doing research on a Schedule I drug, you have to get approval from the Drug Enforcement Agency, which is a federal organization. And you have to sort of have enhanced security measures in your lab, and it's just very difficult to do. So you're mentioning sort of some of the things that we might see from research on medical marijuana, and I wonder if you could speak a little more to what researchers might even be looking for that they could get.
I think I had read that in California they were going to start doing some research using cannabis in cerebral palsy patients because they're seeing that it's benefiting patients with multiple sclerosis, the spasticity disorders, so that maybe if they could reduce the spasticity, patients can become more functional. And that would be a great thing. And even with autism, they're talking about using it to calm some of the, I have a patient who's 19 years old. He's the son of 2 lawyers who gets violent outbursts. He's barely verbal. We placed him on the cannabis and he's ingesting it. They make it into an oil and put it in gelatin capsules, so he gets regular dosing of it. They missed a dose and he had a violent outburst. They gave him his dose, he calmed down, and he came into the kitchen and said to his mother, "Gee, Mom, that wasn't a good thing." And she said, "No, John, that wasn't." And he said, "I'm sorry, Mom." And she sat in my office and cried, because not only did he make full sentences, but he also recognized that he had done something that was wrong. And that had never happened before. So it just makes you wonder what else can come out of some of the research. If they were able to really, even with Alzheimer's patients, maybe we might be able to get more feedback from them. So I think we're just scratching the surface, how this can help. Rather than putting chemicals into our body, why not put something that's a natural product? Mm-hmm.
And I think especially when you see children who are suffering, I mean, anybody who can benefit, that's great, but especially when you see these kids who have drop seizures, and whatever your position on it is, I think there's a special place in hell for people who kept that medication from kids for as long as they did. It's awful. It's awful to see.
And they really didn't break out with children until the Stanley brothers in Colorado developed a strain called Charlotte's Web, which was a high CBD, low THC, primarily from the hemp plant, which really started the revolution. There was also a patient in New Jersey called Vivian Wilson in 2013 who was we were getting a lot of publicity because she had this Darvett syndrome that there was no medication, multiple seizures per day as her parents were at which end, and they actually moved to Colorado because the medicine wasn't available here in New Jersey, specifically Charlotte's Web. She moved out to Colorado to get the medication she wanted. They actually picked up and left states. And it was quite a few other people that had actually relocated to Colorado just because they wanted to have access to that particular strain.
So you mentioned that it's a high CBD, low THC. So there's been a sort of proliferation of CBD-only products recently, and they're sort of regulated as the dietary supplements. And our sort of limited testing quality control sort of is a little bit different for those. But so I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about sort of what CBD only means, where do they come from, sort of how do they work?
The CBD that's you could buy on Amazon or eBay has no THC in it, or so little that it's negligible. And while it's good for insomnia, anxiety disorders, minor problems, you need that little bit of the THC to fully absorb the CBD. So while it's helpful, it's still not as good as what God put on this earth. And, you know, that's how I feel about it.
What the doctor refers to is what they call the entourage effect. In order for it to work properly, it has to have THC and CBD. But actually, any industrial hemp, which is 0.3% THC, derived from industrial hemp, is considered legal under federal law because it's actually rated by the Food and Drug. It's trace amounts. So the stuff you're seeing on Amazon, the stuff you're seeing in all the stores advertised, there's really nothing in it. It's just a marketing ploy to get you to buy their product. Hopefully in the future, when cannabis does become more available, they'll be able to slide that in. And, but right now, I would not advise anybody buying any of that stuff unless you get it from a state that has, not legally, but California or Colorado, which is, has the true CBD medication.
Hemp is not a really efficient source of either of those things. Hemp is a material, really, when you look at it, it's a material for construction, rope, cloth, that sort of thing, and it's great for that. But the content of CBD and THC in the hemp plant is just not that great. You know, traditional cannabis is a much better source. We're doing all this like tap dancing and fancy footwork around a plant, you know, for what? You know, it's just not efficient. Also, when you buy those products online, even if you're getting it from somewhere like Canada, where it's, you know, relatively safe, you don't know how much is actually in it or how much you're getting per, you know, dropper. It's not very well regulated. It's not, and you know, Tom and I talk about this all the time, but you know, those plants, I mean, that whole family of plants is really good at pulling heavy metals out of the ground. So if you're buying CBD from China, where there's high amounts of heavy metals in the ground because it's so polluted, you're ingesting that. Like, that's bad news.
Like glow in the dark.
Yeah, like, or that too. You know, I really encourage people to make sure they understand where their CBD is coming from and make sure it's a reputable source, because you don't know what's in that.
So, Pat, I wonder if you could say a little bit about how you sort of figure out dosages for your patients, you know, thinking about all these different strains and the sort of effectiveness of all the products that are out there.
That's a really tough thing because everybody's, excuse me, everybody's metabolism is so different. What I advise patients when they first start, if they have never used cannabis before, I would like them to start very slow. If they buy the lozenges, buy the half strength, and just to see how they respond to it. Compassionate Care was excellent. They actually went diagnosis by diagnosis of symptoms that patients had, and at least gave a framework to show which plant was most used for that particular illness, so that at least it gave a starting point as to what to choose, because the patients would show up and they would see a menu and a counselor would meet with them to discuss these things. But it really was, it's sort of more up to the patient as to how the benefit is going to be.
Can you just say a little bit more about like sort of what considerations they would sort of think about when they're making that decision, or when you're sort of helping them make that decision?
Sure. You would look at if someone is having more pain, then you would look for higher CBD amounts in the plant. If it's more an anxiety issue or sleep issue or seizure disorder, you're looking for a higher THC or maybe a hybrid plant. And then there's the whole list of terpenes that are available, which are all parts of the plant that do different things for patients, whether it be to increase their appetite or, you know, reduce spasms or take care of pain. There's not really any set, like you could open up a PDR and you see, well, it's so many milligrams per kilogram for this particular medication. But for cannabis, because they don't really have the research available yet, we don't really know exactly, how to dose this. So I just tell patients to start out slow and, more to effect.
I think standardization of dosage is kind of this like common theme. You hear that like CBD and compliance all in the same sort of breath. And what I see now is that some of the device makers, so the folks who are making the real advanced pens, will let you say, I want this degree, this amount from each pull. And so, before where it was sort of, THCA is one of the cannabinoids that are in the plant, and at a certain degree, you're burning off the THCA and it becomes THC. And those are doing different things. Now you can get the pens that will dial it down so that you're still getting the THCA, which is kind of remarkable. I mean, there's a whole new world now of devices that are really, I think, maybe, there's some scary parts too, right? They're recording a lot of the data, which I don't necessarily like, but you are getting a little bit more control over the standardization of dosage, which is great for patients.
I'm sure a doctor will agree that medical science isn't an exact science and everybody's body is different. Everybody's body metabolizes things different. So consequently, people that start out with marijuana kind of need more and more and more to get the same result, only because their body develops a tolerance to it. And that was some of the struggles we had with some of the original patients that were, using cannabis quite frequently for pain, suddenly said, hey, this stuff doesn't work for me anymore. It's because their bodies had developed such a tolerance to it, so they were actually seeking higher and higher strains of THC, and at the price point that we had, they felt that was a better value for them. But it was the tolerance issue a lot of times with people, and again, especially with other medications they were taking too, could have contraindicated what they were taking and really caused some other issues.
But that sort of gets to your question before, what kind of regulations would help. There's certain extracts that will give you more bang for your buck, right? So if you are developing a tolerance to it, maybe you need to go to some of the, higher concentrated extracts, which are available in most markets now.
So how is it that so sort of it's trial and error, it seems, because there's so little research about there on the patient side? How did the dispensary sort of choose which strands to have on hand, since there's presumably not that much research there either?
Well, when we first opened up, believe it or not, it was funny is the state had a don't ask, don't tell how you're going to get your seeds. So we had to finagle a way of smuggling them in from out of the country, and we started out with 3 strains. One was a high THC, a middle THC, and a high CBD. And initial names were Pineapple Chunk, Red Cherry Berry, and Shark Shock. Okay, those are the 3 names that we needed. And as patients came in, they asked us for specific strains. Hey, do you have this strain? Do you have that strain? And our answer was no. Well, can you get it for me? Well, we don't know because it's federally illegal. We just can't call California and say, hey, can you ship us 50 of these clones that we can do? So a lot of times people accepted what we had, and we kind of got more and more strains as we went along. We did a deal with one of the dispensaries, Montclair, who had a strain called Blueberry, which was a high THC strain that was very popular at the time. And they actually gave us 8 plants. We were going to do a deal to develop a high CBD strain, and we found out that Shark Shock wasn't the one, so we had to go out and try to get some AC/DC, which was more of an 8-to-1 ratio CBD to THC. But consequently, what people think, CBD strains don't really sell in dispensaries in a flower form. The only patients that really buy them are patients that have issues with epilepsy, and their mothers that want to actually make tinctures for their children. You get a better quality of product if you go to a state that actually allows you to do more edibles and more CBD extracts. But in New Jersey, and one of the problems with the strains is the consistency of a plant. It's a plant. Right. Sometimes they're, like this year, anybody grew tomatoes in their backyard. It wasn't a good year for tomatoes in Jersey because of the rain. So it's the same thing with plants. It's really a hit or miss. And it's really unfortunate because if you have a child that needs a consistent strain all the time, right, you're not going to be able to get it.
And the plant itself is going to change as you clone it.
Right.
The properties that you liked originally are going to evolve, and so you're constantly searching out for that perfect plant for whatever issue you have.
And that does not seem then to be a problem that we could even sort of regulate our way out of. It's just sort of a function of the
Well, who knows, right? Because we're not allowed to do the research. But I do think, there's sort of these two poles, right? There's the more, Earth Mother-y kind of attitude where it's a plant, leave it as a plant. And then, there's also like the more physician researcher idea where it's like standardization of dosage, making sure that this is consistent and that people can get the medication they want every time. I think because it's such an immature market, especially in New Jersey, we just aren't there yet. We just don't have it.
Okay. Okay, so we have about a half hour left, so I think it would be great to open it up for questions from the audience. So if you have a question, Dr. Abernathy will come around with the mic. You could just make sure to speak into the mic.
Hi. I went to school in the 60s, so it's kind of mind-boggling to me that my life may be saved by cannabis and ketamine. Okay, ketamine is special K, and it's also another drug that is being used to treat certain psychological conditions and that kind of thing. I actually filled out my online registration for my card today, and the expense, despite the fact that I'm a senior citizen, it baffles me further that while my state insurance plan will pay for my Vicodin and my opioids and all the other painkillers that I've been on, they won't pay for my cannabis and they won't pay for a lot of the things associated with treatment. I'm watching with great interest, as we all are, the upcoming decision for legalization in both New Jersey and in New York. And I'm wondering whether or not, should it pass, do you guys think that it's going to have a positive effect on the costs because there'll be more competition? Or do you think it's going to, I can see online that if I could buy it on the street, and I have no idea how to, I could buy it a lot cheaper than I can going through compassionate care. The prices are higher. So is it likely that that will drive the price down, or you have any prediction?
I think in general, if there's a greater market, typically it will go down. But what I would suggest to you is that once you get your card, consider going to a jurisdiction that has reciprocity, that will recognize other state cards. So if you go to, I believe, DC maybe, Rhode Island, DC, the great thing about having the card is that you won't pay as high of an excise tax. So the product will be cheaper. Also, because there's less constraint on licensing in places like DC, there's a cheaper price. So you could go to a dispensary in DC and get the same medication for less, but you would have to consume it there and not go across state lines, because that is illegal. But keep that in mind. There are some states that will recognize your card. Maryland is not one of them, and I believe Colorado is not one of them, but there are states that will recognize cards from out of state.
And I think initially in New Jersey with pending legalization, I think you're still going to see high prices only because of supply and demand. You'll start having medical, you'll start having recreational, plus you'll have people coming in from other states. And Colorado's numbers are really driven by people coming in from other states to purchase. Massachusetts just came online shortly. If you looked in the parking lot, a majority of the cars of Massachusetts weren't from Massachusetts. They were driving over and buying it. So it's a question of, there's only 6 dispensaries right now producing it. They can only produce so much, and the demand will be really high. In the first 6 months to probably a year, the plant takes 90 days to grow. So it's not a question I could just put another assembly line together and put another 100,000 units. I have to consider that growth cycle, which is 90 days minimum.
If you see, the evolution of those markets, Colorado, the price went down significantly. At the height of the market, a pound of cannabis in Colorado was $3,000. $3,000, that's crazy. Now it's well below $800. So, once these markets grow and, there's more production, more consumer base, it does go down, but that process takes a while. And until then, I definitely suggest going to more mature markets to get the medication you need.
Hi, I have a 2-part question. I'd like to know why it can't be grown outdoors in New Jersey, which is the Garden State. And I'd also like to know, because that would help keep the cost down if you didn't have to pay the electric bill. And my other question is regarding why can't you do free commerce with other states that have state licensed dispensaries that do have it at a lesser expense or a greater variety? Why can't there be some free trade there?
Well, I'll take the first part is the state doesn't allow homegrown because you can't tax it. Okay, that's just number one reason. You can grow it outdoors in New Jersey, but that's a rather risky venue for a number of reasons. First of all, we have a short growing season. Okay, a majority of the people really don't know how to do it. Second of all, if your plants, feminized plants are the plants we're talking about that gives us the high ratio THC, the chances are of that plant outdoors is going to be pollinated by a male plant and produce seeds, which is going to produce a less of a quality of plant. We all tried Mexican swag. Remember Mexican swag from the 70s? That was just basically an outdoor plant. But in New Jersey, it's not an easy plant to grow. I mean, people say they can grow it. I know guys that do it and guys that do it rather poorly. I just don't think, from a commercial standpoint, if you had invested in a large greenhouse, yeah, absolutely, that's type of stuff. But for you to do it in your backyard, I think you would be unsuccessful.
I think I'll echo Tom. Also, there's a great deal of paranoia in a lot of these states. The great fear in Pennsylvania, especially on the side of the Republicans when this whole bill was getting passed, was, can you hear me? No? You should have it. I'll put it anywhere else. The battery's not.
It's on now.
Is it better?
The light just went on.
So when the bill in Pennsylvania was passing, there was bipartisan support for it, but the Republicans were very concerned that there would be crime, people breaking into these fields or going crazy, a la reefer madness. And so part of getting the legislation passed is enacting these incredibly overprotective security regulations. So, 24-hour security, cameras on every entrance and exit, safe rooms that are like bomb shelters. I mean, absurd levels. So there is the growing concern because you don't want the feminized plants, or the not feminized, the
male plants.
What are they called?
The male plants.
Yeah. So when the seeds get in there, it's low quality. It's just no good. So there's a couple of reasons. You also get you get more crop. So if there is, one crop that you can produce outdoors, you're now getting 3 or 4 if you do it indoors. So it just makes more financial sense. The reason why you can't go across state, which would be great, there's a piece of legislation right now that would allow you to do that, but it hasn't come to the floor yet in the federal sense. But anyway, so if you go across state lines, you're conducting interstate commerce. It's a federal law that you've just broken. You're going to go to jail for a real long time. So that's why. Everything that is grown here and consumed here is within the state. The second you go across state lines, you're a felon. I mean, it is bad news. The state's bill, which was not allowed to come to the floor of Congress because of Pete Sessions, not Jeff Sessions. Pete Sessions was in charge of all the legislation in the House that would come to the floor. He just got voted out in Texas. So potentially that could change. We could have the States Act, which was supported by Cory Booker in New Jersey and also Elizabeth Warren. That would really solve a lot of problems, especially in Oregon and Colorado and California, where we are producing more than we are consuming, as opposed to Nevada and New Jersey and all these East Coast states where people are struggling to get product and can't get it. So it is absurd that in this country we have such overproduction in one state and underproduction in another, and we can't do anything about it, as if it was a whole nother country. It's ridiculous.
Just a follow-up point to Bridget earlier. She had mentioned about advertising. The radio and TV stations are licensed by the federal government.
Right.
And of course, as you know, it's illegal federally, and they're afraid they're going to lose their license.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I tried to advertise Dr. Kasica in her Galloway office, and I was told that that's a no-no. Yeah. So just to let you know. Yeah. Question for Dr. Kasica. With regards to medical marijuana, I think a lot of people are concerned about addiction. And we all kind of know marijuana, people say it's a gateway drug and all of that stuff. Have you found in your practice is there any kind of possibility that it becomes addictive, especially since they're going to need it to get rid of the pain?
I have not seen, excuse me, I have not seen patients getting addicted to marijuana in the same way that they do to opioids. With opioids, they get a physical addiction to it, whereas with marijuana, I'm just not seeing it. They're using it because they need it, not because with pain patients. And it was always so frustrating for me too, knowing that the patient would get a benefit having pain using cannabis and writing another opioid prescription for them, knowing darn well that that would help them better, but not being able to give it to them. So I think that you wouldn't see that kind of a physical dependence on cannabis like you do with opioids.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not familiar with like D1 categories and D2 categories of drugs, but if it's currently a D1 category and no research could be behind it, if it was to move classes to D2, or is there, I don't know if there's a D3 or something?
Schedule one.
Scheduled drugs. Do you see that one day, like maybe in the far future, that cannabis could become something where pharmaceutical companies want to sell it?
Oh, absolutely. I think pharmaceutical companies are just waiting for the day that it's released from Schedule 1, that they can get a shot at it. They already got the expertise, they've got the equipment, they've got the scientists, they've got the expertise behind them. I think they're just waiting for it to come off Schedule 1 and then looking at how it would fit into what their business plan is at the time. Bristol Myers Squibb buys companies every day. I mean, it's just a matter of how it would fit into their business plan, what they're working on now, and if they can make money on it. And I think, my personal opinion, I think it's going to come off Schedule 1. It'll be available basically in your pharmacy as you go when you buy and it's allergy medication, where you have to show your driver's license and sign for it or whatever. I think it will be something along that line, eventually get into that. But absolutely, I think the drug companies just can't wait.
I mean, you mentioned that there's like the stigma behind it in pharmaceutical, in the federal government, but do you agree that it wouldn't become like as big of like a monopoly within them? Like, you know, like they don't want to sell it because their chemo is so much more expensive and they're making more money, and then
no, I think at that level they wouldn't look at it. I mean, right now it's immunotherapy is the big thing. They're looking at now as to how to increase your immune system to fight cancer as opposed to taking chemotherapy. So there's a lot of money going in that direction. But I mean, you're going to see different companies pop up with different salves and lotions and everything else, gummy bears or something. I think you want to look at one industry that's going to definitely benefit off cannabis is sleep. I mean, cannabis is a tremendous sleep aid, and there's going to be a huge market for cannabis products moving forward just to help people sleep. It's a natural product, not like a melatonin, it's not like an Ambien, it's not like a Sinesta, and any of those drugs. And I think that's going to be a big plus when people realize that. And pharmaceutical companies say, hey, you know what, Sinesta, I'm not Ambien. You know, Ambien does really kind of weird things to people, but I think sleep, it would be one thing. I would invest in a drug company that was doing sleep aids. I think that would be the big moneymaker.
Well, there's GW Pharma, Tikkun Olam, so I think British and Israeli pharmaceutical companies respectively that are already doing this. So if you look at, what is the seizure medication? Epidiolex. Yeah. Epidiolex. So, you know, there are pharmaceutical companies that are already making money in this, right? Tikkun Olam, I don't think they're public, but I'm pretty sure Epidiolex, GW Pharma is a public company. They are. I bought their stock. You know, they exist. They're there. They're making money, and I still see, you know, these big companies from Canada and the United States as well. I mean, if you're worried about, you know, monopolization, it's already here. The big companies are here. They're coming from Colorado. They're coming from California and Canada, and they're here. So, you know, the property is coalescing. The big guys are making money, but they're doing it hand in hand, it seems like, with the drug companies. So.
Hi. I've seen studies from states like Colorado where there have been an increase, even though somewhat slight, like 3% in car accidents due to legalization. How do you feel, what do you think is the best solution to this issue that comes from legalization?
So I read the update on this today, and I think your data is about 3 years behind. If you look at the most recent culmination of research that was done by the state of Colorado, it's actually a decrease. So they're taking all under the influence drivers, and they have disaggregated them. And initially, the number of people who admitted, because they can't test, admitted to smoking within 2 hours of the accident went up. It has recently gone down. And so you can look that up. It's on I think the first page when you go to Colorado's division that talks about the MED website. So I would encourage you to look at the executive summary that's on the first few pages. That data has been updated.
Hi. So I know as of right now, pretty much any physician can prescribe opioids, but you need to have a certain license in order to prescribe cannabis, correct? So in order to combat the opioid crisis, do you think that it would be a viable option to open up prescribing cannabis to all physicians and without having to get that extra licensure?
That probably would be a good idea, but I think it's more the doctor's choice whether they want to become a provider of it or not, because it isn't really that complicated to just, fill out a form to become a provider. I think it's more their choice as far as who's going to prescribe or not.
And under pending legislation now, I think you're going to, mostly any doctor will be able to prescribe it for mostly any ailment, as well as a nurse practitioner, I believe so, right? That they're also going to consider to make the flow a lot easier for people. But again, I think some doctors they just don't want to get involved.
But it's also a recommendation. It's not a prescription,
yes,
right? Because if you call it a prescription, that invokes your federal license.
Yeah.
So it's a recommendation.
Yeah.
I think it's more of a personal choice because of what I had seen with my own family and even with myself. 8 years ago, I was diagnosed with MS. So, with my own journey, and I think when you have such a tragedy happen, it opens your field of vision, and it really opens your mind to looking at other alternative things that you can help yourself with. Mm-hmm.
To that point, if you look at Pennsylvania, they had bipartisan support. It was Dalen Leach, and I cannot remember the Republican state senator's name, and I'm kicking myself. But at the time, his wife had cancer, right? So all of a sudden, one of the hardest right Republicans in Pennsylvania, right, like Senator Pennsylvania, all of a sudden is supporting cannabis. Like, I think it becomes a very personal issue for people, and then it's compassion, and you see it, and you're just like, why was I so against this? Like my father is like super hard Republican. All of a sudden, he's like, oh, now I see what this can do, and I think it does make it real for you.
It's true. The discussion with the opioids and the marijuana, I'm on both, and the marijuana has allowed me to reduce the amount of opioids I take. And as far as going to a doctor and getting a prescription for the opioids, you can do that, but you have to have a urinalysis test every time you go in for a prescription. They test you to make sure you're using and not selling. And one of the problems that we have right now that's not being addressed at all is the most people that need help with the marijuana products, if you look at the statistics, are 55 and older. Older people have joint problems and that the marijuana could really help, but the insurance companies don't pay for it. It's out of your pocket. Some of us can afford it. We can take care of it, but a lot of people can't afford it. What have you heard anything about the insurance companies proposing maybe stepping in and picking up some of the tab?
The obstacle is federal Schedule 1 insurance companies. As long as the is scheduled as a drug that has no medical value, the insurance companies will not get involved.
But I did see there was a case within the last year with workman's comp. So there was a workman's comp case in New Jersey where the judge required workman's comp insurer to pay for cannabis. So, you know, if you look across the states, the jurisprudence is changing, right? The procedure is changing, but it's slow. And I truly believe that until we have solid federal statutory change, we're going to be stuck in this sort of quagmire, you know, where it's just halfway.
Hi, great panel discussion today. I have a lot of history with this. One of the reasons you talk about the regulatory change, I actually went to Congress and asked them to treat medical marijuana as any other legitimate business and to allow us to deduct our business expenses. We are treated as a criminal, right. So we are not allowed to deduct our rents, our salaries, or any of these other things. So essentially, up until this last tax law change, which should bring the price down a little bit, we were taxed at 35% on the sales price. So for every dollar we had to charge you, we had to send 35 cents of that to the federal government, even though it's federally illegal.
Right.
Okay? Now the state wants to put taxes on top of that, so now you're at 42%. So right. At the end of the day, with payroll taxes and everything else, half of the money you're spending for medical marijuana in New Jersey is going to pay taxes.
It's
right.
the tax code section is called 280E, and
right.
it eviscerates these businesses. Right. So if you look at Colorado, you know, federal government considers this illegal, and so even though it's illegal, 280E allows them to tax illegally gotten gains. So the famous case was in the 80s. There was a drug dealer who basically deducted the cost of dealing drugs, and successfully. And so the federal government changed the tax code. So now you have to pay tax on your ill-gotten gains, which is remarkable, right? So this is state legal business, and you're paying, you know, 35% isn't bad. You know, most people are paying more, and because there are no banks to take your money, they're paying their taxes in cash. So you'll see these cash points in Denver where armored cars roll up, and they're paying their tax bill in cash with armored cars. I mean, it's absurd. I have been blindfolded and taken to warehouses where there are piles of cash. That should not exist. We have banks. This is not a third world country. It's crazy. It's crazy.
So I drove an hour and a half to come here today to ask about one specific thing. Is you were mentioning that there are 3,000 people a year dying of opioid overdoses just in New Jersey. We kill twice as many people with opioids as right. we do with drunk drivers.
Right.
Right. So let's say I have somebody that is addicted to opioids now. However they got them, it was through their grandmother's medicine cabinet or at a party or whatever. They took them for 5 days. Now they're addicted.
Right.
How does medical marijuana help me get that person off of the addiction? That's my question.
Because the medical marijuana binds to the same receptors in the brain that the opioids do, you can have them come off whether you wean them or I've seen patients do it cold turkey. They don't go through the withdrawal that had they not had the medical cannabis. I mean, you might be able to balance and use some Suboxone in the interim and then put them on the medical marijuana. If they got hooked because of pain issues, that would be one thing. But if they just simply started taking the opioid and got addicted, that might be a little tougher. You may have to go the Suboxone route to get them off.
Thank you.
So as the legal industry expands, is there going to be any concrete efforts in New Jersey to address the legacy of criminalization for communities of color?
I didn't hear
Can you say
that.
that again?
How the criminalization has historically affected communities of color. Is there going to be any distinct efforts in New Jersey to address those wrongs during the expansion of the industry?
So if you look at the proposed bill right now, written by Scutari, I believe, there is a social equity program in there. So basically you're awarded points based on your application and what's in it. You would get greater points for having women, minorities, I think vets. All of those things would sort of add to the strength of your application. In some states like California, and it's down to a municipal level, they have programs where bigger, richer, whiter, essentially, owners of licenses will carve out physical space and will give advice and consulting help to smaller licensees. But I can't speak to the strength of that program because they really haven't existed that long. But that's what people are trying to do.
We have several thousand people that go to John Brooks and addiction recovery systems here in Atlantic County, and they receive methadone. So you're recommending in maybe 10, 15, 20 years they might switch over to another replacement?
I think it's possible. Definitely.
And do you think it'll take that long? I mean, right now, most of those patients, these thousands of people that are right now in Atlantic County going to John Brooks and ARS, most of them are on Medicare. They have no money. Yeah. So, I mean, they can't just say, well, tomorrow we're going to switch our program.
No, that's...
So.
Federal legalization, I think, will directly address that. And it's also cheaper to produce, you know, even an extract of cannabis than it is to produce those drugs. So if depending on when federal prohibition ends, would be the best answer to that.
I think that's what Big Pharma will look at immediately, something
Yeah.
like that. They can, you know, they can get involved with that rather quickly with the expertise that they would have.
Okay, so unfortunately we are out of time, but thank you all for your wonderful remarks and comments and your great questions. So let's give our panelists a round of applause. I also just want to note quickly, because so many of our questions in the discussion sort of turned to the question of legalization for recreational use, that is being considered by lawmakers in Trenton. The Political Engagement Project is currently planning a panel for next semester in the spring that will focus on the sort of question of legalization and all of the sort of complicated issues that surround that and its implementation. So if you're interested, look for information on that panel soon. Okay, so thank you everyone and have a good night. Oh yeah, right, and Dr. Abernathy has a sign-in sheet if you have not done that yet.